So today you are going to really dive into skillfully blending your evidence. When you're asked to use evidence from the text, it's a great skill to be able to blend that into a sentence rather than just throwing the evidence at me. So we're going to go over what you need to do in order to skillfully blend your evidence into your writing. So what do I mean by skillfully blend? Well, first of all, skillfully, it means to show mastery of your ability to introduce and cite your evidence. So really we're focusing on that mastery of that skill. When we talk about blending, we are really making a cohesive, uniform sentence when we're using textual evidence. So we're not all over the place. It's very cohesive. It makes a lot of sense. And then lastly, just to review, when I say evidence, I mean direct quotes. I mean paraphrases from the text. Okay, it can be either or, definitely should be both. So how do we do this? So we introduce and we cite our evidence in order to skillfully blend it. When I say introduce, I mean using those introductory phrases, using those sentence starters to lead the reader into your evidence. And when I say citing evidence, I mean using those in-text citations to tell the reader how and where to find your evidence. And we're going to go into each one of these in a little more detail here, but that's just the general idea of what I'm looking for when I'm asking you to skillfully blend your evidence in your writing. So we're going to use those sentence starters in order to introduce our evidence. We can call them sentence starters. We can also call them introductory phrases. And I really love using that terminology there, introductory phrase, because I feel like it helps you remember this is what needs to introduce my quote. So one thing that you could say is in the text it states this. You could also use according to the article or the character or the author, whatever you want to put there. Another one is for example or for instance, or on page blank it says this, or I know this because the author character says this. Obviously that last one can only come if you give me some sort of response, some sort of answer before that sentence. So you're not limited to these introductory phrases, but these are definitely good go-tos when you're working to introduce your evidence. Second part is using those in-text citations. The reason that we do this is it's your duty as a writer to tell the reader where you retrieved your evidence by providing them with two very essential pieces of information. The first is the author's last name. They should be able to find your evidence if they type in the author's last name. And then also you need to have the page or paragraph number where you found this. That way, you know, if you give me page 116, I can flip to page 116 and find exactly what you're talking about, and then also gain some context if I need to. There are three ways that we could do this, that we could format this in our writing. Probably the best way to do it would be this first option, by having that introductory phrase, Ponyboy says, giving your evidence, and then at the end having in parentheses the author's last name and the page number. However, you do not have to go this route. You can actually do it this way by giving the page number in your introductory phrase by saying on page 116, Ponyboy says, then giving me your direct quote or your evidence, and then having the author's last name at the end. Or you can get rid of the parentheses altogether, and you can say Hinton shows this, Hinton is the author, on page 116 when Ponyboy says, and then give your evidence. You just need to make sure that you have both of those pieces. You have to have the author's last name and you have to have the page or paragraph number in order to have an effective in-text citation. So whether that comes in parentheses at the end or whether it comes partially at the end and partially in the beginning or all in your introductory phrase is up to you, but just make sure that that information is there for the reader. Okay, last thing that we need to talk about is your punctuation. We need to make sure that we're punctuating our responses correctly in order to skillfully blend them. So in the text, Ponyboy says, "That is my introductory phrase." Right after my introductory phrase and before my direct quote, I'm going to put a comma. And I need to put that there to kind of set off that this is where my quote begins. And then right after that comma, I'm going to use those quotation marks if I'm using a direct quote. Remember, quotation marks only come if you're using a direct quote. If you're putting something in your own words or paraphrasing something, quotation marks are not necessary because it's your own words. However, you do still need to cite. Then you're going to use a comma after your direct quote and before the closing quotation marks. And that's very essential if you have a direct quote there. Between the author and the page number, you need another comma. We're comma crazy here. And it goes there to kind of, say, okay, this is the author and this is the page number, and just set those two things apart. So don't forget that. And then lastly, your period does not come until the very end, after your in-text citation, after your parentheses. Okay, so lastly, let's just talk about why. Why do I want you to do this? First of all, I want you to be able to show your thinking, and I want you to be able to do it in an effective way. So instead of just throwing a quote at me, you're showing me that you can formulate your ideas, and you can tell me, this is where I found this information. I've really been thinking about this a lot. Second, it's going to help you do better on assessments, on the state assessments, on formative assessments that we do every month. All of these things test your ability to cite evidence and to skillfully blend evidence. It encourages good reading practices, which I think is really important for some of us. It really encourages you to be constantly looking for evidence in the text so that you can come back and use that evidence later. And then lastly, it allows you to prove your point. So a lot of the times when we get in arguments with people, maybe debates with people about things in the news or, certain controversial topics, the best way to show that you are knowledgeable about that topic or about that piece of news is to bring in evidence and to skillfully blend that evidence into your argument. So those are the big whys of why we're doing this. And now you should be able to skillfully blend your evidence that you find in the text.